Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Employee Development Unlocks Peak Performance in Manufacturing. We're glad you could join us. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I'll be facilitating this timely discussion about how training helps you get the most out of your employees and helps them make the most of their potential. We all know production targets and consumer demand are going up. Meanwhile, the number of workers who choose manufacturing as their career path is going down. Hiring sprees, new equipment, and technological upgrades aren't the only options you should consider to close this gap. Using training to empower the workers you already have can make them better, happier, and more engaged. Today, we're going to talk about implementing training programs that go far beyond compliance or checking a box. We're going to highlight the difference training can make when it comes to improving productivity, motivating employees, and creating clear career paths. Before we begin, let's go through some quick tips to make sure your webinar experience is the best it can be. At the bottom of your screen are resizable and movable application widgets. Feel free to shift them around to make the most of your desktop space. The slides will advance automatically during the presentation. If you need to enlarge them, simply click the Enlarge Slides button in the top right corner of the presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click the Help widget in the bottom left corner at any time. You can submit questions using the Q&A widget at any time. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation, but if a more informative answer is needed, or if we run out of time before we get to your question, then we'll follow up via email. After today's presentation, you'll receive a link with on-demand access to the webinar, so you can watch it again at any time or share the content with your colleagues. And with that, let's meet our two experts today. Nate, how about we start with you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Nate Waltz, CEO of WorkForge, and our organization is focused on empowering manufacturers really to achieve excellence through innovative e-learning and offering personalized and configurable training programs that enhance operational efficiency and foster employee growth. Prior to working here with WorkForge here over the last 4 years, I spent 12 years working at an education technology company called Ascend Learning, most recently as a vice president. And then also experience working in capital mentorship, venture capital mentorship, specifically with Techstars, and also an adjunct professor at William Jewell College. And just a little bit prior education background, a bachelor's degree from University of Kansas, some graduate degrees from some other institutions, and some work at Harvard University as well. Excited to spend a little bit of time talking with you.
Thank you so much, Nate. And Kevin, welcome to you as well. Would you tell us about your background?
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Kevin Kelly. I'm president and CEO of Lifeline Foods here in St. Joseph, Missouri. And I have been here since 2017. We're a corn milling operation that produces value-added corn ingredients. I've been in the industry, food industry, for over 40 years. And I've had run the gamut in terms of companies that are really good at training, like Procter & Gamble and General Mills, who I've worked for, and some probably that not quite as good. They tend to be on the smaller side. And it's been an interesting experience to see the differences that training makes when it comes to operational results. I have degrees from University of Iowa, University of Minnesota, both. And I'm also on the Kansas State Board of Advisors on the agriculture department and their curriculum. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. Glad to have you both. So with that, let's get started. And Nate, I'd like to start with a question for you. You've been in the industry for a while and work with many manufacturers, each at a different stage of implementing their training program. Why is training becoming such a critical part of workforce development in manufacturing right now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting environment. And honestly, you could say that, this is sort of a recent or, a new environment for manufacturers, but at large, it's really been a persistent issue over a period of decades as we think about labor. And it really comes down to attracting, retaining, and developing talent. This is always on the minds of senior leaders, whether you're in human resources, a supervisor, production supervisor, involved in learning and development officially, plant operations, maintenance. This is really a pervasive problem, kind of across the board. And, number one, it's a talent attraction issue, a recruitment issue, of course. And, trying to find people who have some of these skills, these experiences in this space can be really, really challenging. And it's even some of the most basic skills that I hear quite a bit when I talk with our manufacturing clients. Things like, how to use a tape measure, just trying to teach some of that, get people exposed to that. For a lot of generations and for a lot of people, this seems pretty novice, but it's the reality of a lot of the potential recruits and people that are coming in and available for these kind of jobs, or people that our manufacturers are encountering. So, it's a lot easier to keep highly skilled, qualified employees and keep them moving up the ladder than it is to try to find a new one. And so, the recruitment process, and especially that first, few months, first 6 months that somebody's exposed to a new job, a new opportunity, a new set of skills, can be really, really challenging. And then, of course, you've got to layer in all the other fundamentals of what's happening in the economy as it pertains to labor. So, manufacturers have been operating, as have a lot of other, parts of the American economy, in really a low unemployment environment that's really, really competitive. And so, when you historically think about, how people are being introduced to this industry, or how they might get introduced to this industry, they're oftentimes coming to this with some preconceived notions that really kind of get in the way of why they might look at changing from another part of, the economy itself. And so, not only is everybody in this economy competing for employees in a low employment environment, but maybe when you're in a part of the economy that people don't necessarily think of first, it can really present a lot of additional challenges. As workers look for these opportunities, they're really thinking about it from a kind of a generational perspective. You have a lot of young professionals, who've spent time, really thinking about tech-driven work. Tech-driven work environments, and they don't necessarily realize that there's just an immense amount of technology at the heart of manufacturing. You have these really, really advanced skills, really, really advanced concepts around things like robotics and automation, sensors and programming. And these are all really, really important things to learn. They're high technology. They require training. They require skills. They require experiences. And so, when people think of technology, they really think of, say, Silicon Valley, or they think of artificial intelligence, they think of coding, things like that. They're not necessarily thinking of how all of that, by the way, also plays into what's happening in the manufacturing environment, and food manufacturing in particular. And of course, you still have, these generational concepts that have been passed down, that manufacturing can be, dull or dirty or dangerous. And really what's happening in this environment is that manufacturing jobs are really moving upstream in terms of just the technological skills. As we talked about, some of the fundamentals here, are highly technical. And that the best part is that they don't necessarily require an expensive degree or having to go to college for 4 years. In many, many cases, we see manufacturing employers who are willing and able to teach these skills. And recognize that based on some of the structural challenges they have, or the competitive challenges they have in searching for talent, they're very, very willing to do that. So, we really just have an industry that faces pretty intense competition, across the continuum of attracting talent, retaining talent, and, how we challenge some new thinking for how we get people interested in these careers, how we make sure that they're prepared, capable, ready to be successful early on. It was just really, really important when we think about what happens with an employee, perhaps, later even in the first year, in terms of their trajectory for retention.
Thank you. Kevin, any thoughts to add there?
Yeah, I'll tag on to what Nate said. The way I look at it is from a P&L standpoint. There is a cost of doing business related to training. And I've gotten the good fortune of being able to experience really solid, effective training programs in places I've worked, and some not as good. And I'll put it in real simple terms. Good quality trained employees absolutely equals higher profit. And if you're looking to increase profitability, look no further than your employment base and your employees, because if they do their job better, it's money in the pockets of the shareholders/owners, and that's the way it should be. Some of the statistics nationally is rule of thumb is if you pay somebody a salary, you're going to spend that much training them, or an hourly wage annualized, you're going to spend that much. So if you have a $40,000 a year employee, your first year, you're probably going to invest a lot of soft costs, but it's there, another 40,000. Well, let's avoid that. You avoid that by having employees who want to come to work, enjoy their work. And the reason they do is they know what they're doing. They know what the capabilities are. They know how to do their job better, and they feel better about the outcome. And that comes directly from well-trained employees.
Well said. Thank you, Kevin. Nate, any final thoughts to add here before we move on?
Yeah, I just think there's a themology that kind of has to be recognized, maybe changed, as we go forward. And I think, Kevin really hits on the heart of it, which is when we think about when we think about learning and development, we think about training, these concepts. I think a lot of times manufacturers take a little bit of an older way of thinking about, kind of investment, and they think about investment through the lens of things like equipment or facilities. They're not necessarily thinking about it in terms of their most important investment, which is the people, right? And so I think in some ways we've got this thinking that it's really a cost, and instead it's really needs to be seen through the lens of investment. How do I invest in my people from a learning and development end of things? And I think it's also really easy to try to think about these big leaps that people want to make in terms of attrition. They might think like, oh, we want to move the needle 50% because maybe it's that big of a challenge. But the reality is you really have to take a bite out of the elephant, kind of one bite at a time, right? I mean, it's a big challenge, and incrementally your ability to impact employees with learning and development has such a broad effect on the organization over time, and not just from can I impact attrition by 50 basis points. Maybe it's 10 to 20 basis points, and then of course there's just a lot of other downstream effects of having a well-trained, secure workforce, who feels supported and feels like they have a career pathway that they can grow from. So really taking the perspective from cost to investment, I think, is really, really important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Kevin, could you tell us more about how and why training has become such a big part of the culture at Lifeline Foods? What motivated you to seek training as an answer to some of the challenges your company faced?
When I got to Lifeline, I'll use a term, we were a small family company. Well, when I say small, we're over 300 million a year in sales. That's not exactly small, but it felt like a family company. The things have been done through tradition. And one of the traditions was very limited training. We were not unlike many companies. You train employees by hiring them, throw them out on the shop floor, say, hey, go follow this seasoned or more veteran employee, see what they do and learn from them. And that was pretty much what we had. It was my observation and my experience is when you have well-trained employees, you lead to higher productivity, reduced turnover, improve throughput, better quality. All of this comes through knowing how to do a job better. And the training is critical to that. If you don't have a good trainer and you're throwing a new employee with that person, they might be getting the wrong message altogether. And that did happen. So what we found is we needed to standardize it, and we needed to make sure that it was right for that individual person in that department. And we looked for the way to accomplish that, which is what led us to WorkForge. But the best example I'd give you is how does that make a difference? Some of this, as I said earlier, is hard to quantify. And an example I've used repeatedly is during my years at General Mills, we had a lot of plants making a lot of different products. And there was a huge variation plant to plant, even within, for example, the cold cereal line. One plant was better than another and better than another yet. And it bothered operations, so they did a deep dive. And it sounds kind of funny and a little bit quirky, but what we did is a deep dive using NASCAR pit crews as the template. They literally filmed, did time motion studies, cost of time motion, cost of changeover and switch outs. And what they did is they took some of that and took it into the plant level. And what happened was productivity and throughput increased dramatically because employees were doing the right thing, the right way, in a timely fashion. And the employees at the plant level appreciated it. So it intensified their training and really gave, I'll call it customized, standardized training to where they're doing things the correct way. And it led to terrific results long term. To this day, they still have that program in place at General Mills. You always leave the door open for employee suggestions and innovation. Listen to your workers. Are closer to the job than managers frequently. So listen to it, but there are some tenets that have to be adhered to. And if you get that nice combination of an open door to innovation along with standardized process-driven training, it leads to great results.
Thank you, Kevin. Nate, what are your thoughts on Kevin's experience?
I think it's very common for organizations to have this experience, and it doesn't necessarily matter the size or necessarily the maturity of the organization. The reality is there's just a lot of challenges, with the labor force, with the workforce, and their experiences, depending on where they're at. And Kevin mentioned some of it, which could be inconsistent knowledge, could be incorrect knowledge being applied and how it's passed down. And I think a really key word that Kevin brings up is the idea of standardization. In many cases, when you're thinking about how employees learn their job, a lot of it's very informal. And it can be informal because of a variety of reasons. It has to do with maybe limited resources to support it, maybe no real plan, maybe the quality of the people who are helping to support the new employee they're not necessarily trainers, maybe they're busy. There's just a bunch of different variables that could come into play that equal this idea of non-standard, maybe in some cases, non-approved, non-optimized, type of work. And then I think you have to layer on the skills challenge once again. You just have, in many cases, a lot of people who are newer to this particular sector, this particular type of work. And, again, I hate to go back to things like tape measures or hammers, but I hear it just everywhere and often from lots and lots of food manufacturers that the people that are coming in just don't have a lot of the experiences and exposure and skills that we might consider to be very entry, that they're actually kind of like sub-entry in some cases. And we just really can't take for granted, that people are really starting from different places when they take on these jobs. It's just, we have to realize that people are just starting from different positions in many, many cases.
Excellent points. Thank you. Kevin, can you explain how you've gotten Lifeline Foods to where it is today with its training initiatives? You had mentioned that there was no standardized training program in place when you joined the company in 2017. So what steps did you take to get it off the ground?
Yeah, I knew we needed to install a very comprehensive, thorough training program. And so I started searching the marketplace for who is somebody who can give me, and I'll use the term I use, customized standardization. There is no two plants in America that produce identical products, regardless of what the manufacturer says. There's always differences. And we have been able to identify, here's what we need to do in this department to train, and this department is different, and they need to do this. So we looked around for a partner who could give us what I'll call customized solutions that really standardized our processes. And that did lead me to WorkForge ultimately. We knew what we needed. We needed somebody who could start at A and finish at Z, and we needed everything in between. We weren't equipped internally to do that ourselves. So we did search and found a good partner, and it has been a work in progress. We still have one department yet to go in maintenance, which is extremely challenging to standardize because there is no one way that you can say, this is the only way a machine will break. No, that's not true. It can break 65 different ways. So we're working on that as the final module. But the ones we have put in place via video with real people, my employees and managers, with scripts, with the quizzes we've subsequently added and reinforced training, it's been very, very helpful. And it's led to a variety of things that have been positive. So it really is that need for a good comprehensive training partner that frankly wasn't here now we have one and we're using them.
Excellent. Thank you. Nate, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, sure. I think I think there's a lot of ways to think about how you roll out training and learning and development, and a lot of times people look at it through kind of micro lens, macro lens, and what we oftentimes end up with in manufacturing is sort of interesting. We end up with sort of this idea that generalized type training from almost an administrative standpoint, a white collar standpoint, is really the only place to kind of invest and the only place to kind of provide resources. And really, it's in some cases we're missing out on the largest part of the manufacturing organization, which of course there's going to be your operators, your producers, people in maintenance. When you put all that together, that's 55-60% of the workforce for a given manufacturer. And just even naming those numbers of positions, there's just different needs. There's just different needs for each of those positions. And also when you layer on what stage or what maturity level they are within that position or within that part of their career, right? And then, you start to layer in things like, okay, well, what are things that are basic levels of knowledge around something like pneumatics or something like hydraulics or something like welding versus maybe something that's maybe compliance or regulatory driven that maybe has to be done, once or twice a year, right? It requires, you setting aside an hour of time versus maybe 15 minutes of time. And so, I think you just have to think about what you're trying to accomplish from both what we consider to be a foundational versus a functional, sort of content set or training set. Because in some cases, when you're talking about foundational, you're talking about things that are sort of things that you're going to encounter from maybe a teamwork or a communication perspective, conflict management, how you work with people, these things that are called, durable skills, or some people call them soft skills, right? And then, on the other side, you've got functional skills, which are really about technical skills. And some of those things, that we talk about with pneumatics or welding or PLC or robotics, right? These are things that you can really crystallize as concepts that you can do knowledge checks on and kind of reinforce the competency around that and level up your competency as you progress within that particular track. And then also, again, back to the idea of time. How much time does somebody have in a given day? When would I schedule that time? How would I have access to the right resources in order to take, that training? Is it over lunch? Is it before work? Is it, is it a few minutes like micro modules, or is it something much longer than that? So I think there's just a lot of things that have to be considered within a learning development program. And it's just not a one size fits all. And I think what Kevin's really addressed here is, a few concepts around things like standardization that are really important. The idea of getting to the specific topics, the specific training that might be very, very specific to that particular plant and to that particular organization, that particular workforce or set of people that are part of that workforce. And there's just not really a cookie cutter approach to it in many cases.
So Nate, as manufacturers get their training programs going, how can they manage all their training content and keep track of employee progress? That seems like a big job.
It's a really big job. And, of course, manufacturers are great at producing what they're intending to make, right? What they're intending to produce. But they're not necessarily built to be learning and development organizations, right? And so what we oftentimes find is that, kind of going back to the prior question, if we're thinking about learning and development through the lens of kind of a cookie cutter program, typically an LMS, learning management system, is typically called, those were born really to solve problems in the world of academia. They were not necessarily originally created to solve employer-based problems, which of course is where we're focused. And really what you need to look for if you're an employer is understanding that your needs are very, very different in many cases in terms of how you operationalize something like a learning management system versus maybe the way a college might operationalize something, because you just have different use cases from what we see. And really what we find is really, really important for employers, because so much of this information is required either for audits or for training plans, is how it becomes actionable. And so we really think about it through the lens of how do you better understand the DNA of your employees, right? What do they know how to do? So you should be able to flag, skills and competencies that the job requires, and how they progress throughout the job or through the career, or what's the next job, and what's going to be necessary to support that employee to do that. And if you're operating off Excel spreadsheets or written notes in a little notebook, or even worse, in somebody's head, manufacturing plants employ just a lot of people. It's big business, a lot of people. It's a lot to remember. It's a lot to try to coordinate. And if you're not doing that with technology to help you, then the amount of hours that you're spending in inefficiency and ineffectiveness is quite high, right? So you really should be able to track everyone's performance. You can do things like checkpoints with workers to make sure you understand what they're learning, things like personal development plans that you can really systematically approach in terms of how you work with each employee. That can be very, very difficult if you're trying to do that in an analog fashion. You need ways to help the employees demonstrate competency. And that could be things like quizzes, assessments. There's lots of different ways to understand this. And quite frankly, there's a lot of different use cases for how you're assessing an employee in the first place, beyond just the digital environment. In many cases, employers have a required step that an employee demonstrates a particular skill in action. So beyond the e-learning environment and into things like, sign off, maybe taking a short video, taking a picture of completed work. But a lot of times that stuff has to be kept track of. It's part of the idea of development, and it's part of record keeping when you think about things like audits, for example. So you really got to be able to take into account all the artifacts and components that you need to keep track of that are part of somebody's development plan. And ultimately, you're really plotting somebody a career path, right? Because what you're really hoping for, if you've done it right, if we have a good match around, hey, I like this company, I like the work, then you've tackled a really big part of the challenge of keeping talent, really that first 6 to 9 months. And that is, from there, how do you plot out hopefully a long-term career path for these individuals? And so training can really help turn your workers into the best manufacturing employees they can be. And if you're thinking about it from an investment standpoint, you really want to develop them with the idea of hire to retire. You want some personalization, you want some configurability, you want to be able to assemble all of these really complex pieces in order to create something that is personalized, that will get that employee to understand that you're investing in them, they're investing in themselves. If they do this, it's going to equal a better outcome for the organization, for production, and for themselves. And again, if you're doing this in an analog way, you're really you've got to embrace a smart platform. And digital technology, with where we're at today, just gives you so much flexibility. It gives you so much opportunity to automate, to communicate with your employees, to use technology to do more with each individual, because people are busy, right? They're just busy, and you can only dedicate so much time, within the size of an organization, around developing, all of these people that you got to develop. So, I think the last piece I would probably add to this is, if you're looking for incentivization, one of the things that we find is common is, as people progress in their learning plans, there's in some level of incentivization there from a monetary perspective. And it may be small, it may not be, $1,000 or, $50,000, it could be just small incremental gains and recognition that rewards an employee for, spending the time going through their development plans, participating, doing the things, demonstrating the things that they need to demonstrate in order to show progression. And financial incentive, of course, is a great way to do that everybody appreciates.
Excellent. Thank you, Nate. So, Kevin, I'm curious, what results have you seen after implementing your company's training program? Thanks to your exit surveys, you had great data to support the need for better training. So what sorts of outcomes are you seeing now?
Again, we're always going to be looking at the profit component here at Lifeline, and we try to break it into different pieces. And one of them we focused on is turnover. When I got here, we had turnover in the 60 to 70% range. The national average is over 50% on heavy manufacturing turnover. We were above that, and it was a concern because although some turnover is not always bad, when you lose people you want to hang on to, that costs a lot of money. And when we did these exit interviews, first few years, we found one of the number one reason people were leaving and going to, frankly, just a parallel path type of lateral move into manufacturing by that employee. They would say on the way out, my training wasn't very good. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure how to do things. And we focused in on that and realized we just don't do a good job of training, and that is money. That costs money when you have that turnover. Since we have implemented a much improved training program with Workforce's help, our turnover is under 50%. That's the way we want to keep it, and like to keep lowering it, and we hopefully will. But that is money in the pocket. It's sometimes a little bit of a soft cost, but make no mistake, it's there. So we really want to reduce turnover. And the other part of it is do things the right way. If you improve productivity, again, it improves throughput and improves profitability. And that training ensures that your employee most of the time now knows how to do the things the right way. And that's going to lead to those improved results. A couple of specific examples. I've got one department where we put the training in and the uptime improved by 10 to 15%, and unscheduled downtime was running double digits, is now under 5%. It's because our operators, who were unfortunately the root cause of much of our downtime, they weren't doing it the right way. Now we've got a way to show them from day one, from the new employee orientation to the initial training to this follow-up training and everything in between. We have got that uptime going exceptionally well and unscheduled downtime down. We put it in the packaging department, and we have improved. It's almost unreal. Unfortunately, I have to admit how bad our productivity was on our packaging department. We put in a much more standardized training program that's customized to our company's needs, and we've seen about a 50% improvement in terms of throughput on getting more bags of product out into the marketplace from what we did have. I mean, we have really improved our packaging. So we've got statistically the ability to quantify these gains made as a direct result of training. And it's been very helpful. It allows us to really monetize what was that training worth. Well, here it is. It's black and white, you can see. And the other side of it is, and it's a subtle one, but it's also very important, is we want our employees to go home safe and sound every night. And when you standardize and improve your training, you're lowering the risk of on-site industrial accidents. We have lowered our work comp claims significantly because people aren't doing things incorrectly. And when you lower that, you're also then lowering your premiums that you're paying for that insurance. And we've got a rebate last year because we had very few work comp claims. So the insurance company pleasantly gave us a rebate. So we want to keep it that way. And it's sometimes hard to link, but there's no question it's related to training.
Excellent. Thank you. Nate, based on what Kevin just shared, is that something that you're seeing kind of across the board?
Absolutely. And I think a really important part of what Kevin's saying is, again, going back to the idea of investment versus cost for learning and development, right? Insurance, it's a cost, right? And how can we impact that cost? Just as an example, it's one of many, many examples of levers that you can pull on with an organization to create efficiency and create savings or create productivity. And the reality of it is that the investment in learning and development and applied investment to specific areas, like I'm really glad that Kevin brought up the packaging department, right? That was obviously a very, very specific place that through observation and data, they recognized a gap, and they chose to use learning and development as part of the solution. It may not be the entirety of the solution that closed that gap, but it was a meaningful part of how they closed that gap. And when you look at the opportunity to take learning and development as part of a solution that is going to yield ROI for your organization, then that is the right way to think about it. So I'll give you another example. We work with a lot of OEMs who are suppliers into food manufacturing. They make equipment, things like that. And we had one that deployed our content and some very intentional learning plans. And they were able to move the needle on productivity for a new employee by 62%. And that's huge. So if you go from a state where you're just sort of taking on a new employee in a really informal way, and you can go and produce a really formal learning and development program and get them their time of productivity to improve by 62%. I mean, that's dollars. It's dollars and cents, right? And it's a big deal to the organization. So, the other way I think about it is through the lens of a lot of the things that happen in a plant, as Kevin said, that are, perhaps unique because of process or because of equipment. And, maintenance is a big part of this, right? While maintenance workers might represent a smaller percentage of the workforce in a plant, they're so critical because they're the ones troubleshooting and fixing, a lot of the problems that become the bottleneck for why something goes down. And we just have a huge gap right now in terms of being able to have access to credible maintenance workers with experience and with skills to be able to come in and take these jobs. It's a huge deficiency right now. And part of the problem is you have to have some experience. You have to have a set of many experiences and skills across many areas in order to be effective in that space because of what you're asked to do. And so, we've seen some really interesting kind of things happen here as a way to deal with this problem, because maintenance workers are also, a scarce resource, expensive resource in many cases, that we develop content for many of our manufacturers that support the machines themselves, because in many cases the OEMs are not supporting them. They don't have appropriate learning and development resources to support that. And so what we've done is created content that can help the operators, the producers, if there is a basic problem, do some of the entry-level steps to identifying the most common set of problems that they might encounter with something, if something happens, with a machine, if something happens, and how to fix it. And that removes some bottlenecks, that removes some costs, that helps to streamline the organization in some ways that are really, really meaningful. And so, I think there's just a lot of ways to apply learning and development creatively and really through the lens of how does it yield me a specific outcome that is going to equal dollars and cents for my organization as well, because that's the reality of why you make this investment in the first place.
Well said. Thank you. Kevin, what advice do you have for manufacturers that are interested in exploring what training might do for their workforce?
The strong recommendation I would give is to anybody in manufacturing, pick out your problem child. Find out what department is giving you the most issues that is hindering the plant's performance. It could be packaging, it could be logistics in terms of loading trucks and unloading. It could be anything, the put away crew in the warehouse. There's a lot of areas to focus on. Usually there's one that just is a pain and it's difficult. Pick that department, focus on it, and use, I'd strongly recommend Workforge come in and analyze how can we help this company in this department train their employees to be more effective and productive. And once you're in with that type of an approach and you see results, and you will see results, positive results, it then gives you the confidence to roll it to other departments. But I think you start with a problem area and you roll from there, and you got to stick with it. I'm going to reinforce that point too. Training is ongoing. There is no end game. You have to continue to be on it, and it's not one shot and done. We intend to reinforce and revise training every year, even for some of the modules we've had in place now for a while. You have to stick with it because you can't ever let up. Once you stay on a solid training path, you're going to want to stick to it because your errors go down, your productivity goes up, your throughput goes up, and your costs go down. It's all tied together.
Excellent. Well, thanks to you both for sharing these insights. We have had a few questions that have come in while you were presenting everything there, and we have a few minutes left to address some of them. Just a reminder for our viewers, if we do not get to your question during this webcast, then we will follow up later via email to get you the information that you need. So our first one here is for Nate. You had mentioned a few times how training can help create career paths for employees. Could you tell us more about that and how you might communicate those plans to workers?
Yeah, I think it through the lens of, kind of professional development plans and how do you, organize that in the first place. We kind of addressed, I think a little bit earlier touched on this, that, there's a lot that goes into that. And, if you think through the lens of kind of one employee, it doesn't seem all that daunting. But if you think about it through the lens of hundreds of employees and how do you possibly create that and manage it, it become pretty daunting for a lot of people to kind of wrap their heads around, especially if you start down this pathway. And so, having a good framework, having good tools like a good platform, good LMS, for example, having access to content so that you don't have to go find and go build content, is really, really essential. And again, you're going to find that there are just so many different needs for each individual that you got to have this really, really deep bench of tools that you can access in order to create and maintain and get effectiveness from these kind of professional development plans. And so, when you think about a career path, you're not only talking about understanding the employee and where they're trying to go, but you're trying to understand their gaps, which requires assessment. You're trying to understand if they close those gaps, which would be, is there competency or is there an artifact that would demonstrate that they've closed that gap, such as a video or a picture or something on those, or sign off from a supervisor, even that basic. And just being able to draw upon a variety of resources to create that, modify it, work with the employee to watch how they're progressing and help them along the way. Because ideally, this never ends. This is something where you have highly motivated employees and a highly, motivated employer where they want to continue to invest because they know that the outcomes are going to be very, very positive for the employee and the organization.
Excellent. Thank you. And Nate, at the start of the webinar, you were talking about young workers expecting to receive on-the-job training. Is training something we should be talking about during the interview process? And what kind of training they want or expect?
Yeah, I think it's a differentiator. There's lots of reports out there now, independent reports from consultancies and other places that indicate, what younger generations are sort of expecting out of an employer. And again, I think one of those things that the younger generation, as expected, would really want is that investment in them. What are the resources that I know are going to be available that are going to help make me successful early in this job and later in this job? And how can I envision something beyond maybe the first 6 to 9 months of this new job, this new employer? And how does it become a career, right? Everybody remembers when they started out their first couple jobs and, and what that looked like and, the stress of it and, beyond just, working with a new team or understanding new culture or what am I supposed to be making? Am I doing it right? Those are all pretty table stakes stuff, much less when you get into things like, gosh, do I have the skills, the hard skills, in some cases, the technical skills that are required to be effective, on this job? And when you think about, how manufacturing operates, ultimately there's a level of optimization, there's a level of output that's really, really critical. And so you don't want to be the one who broke it. You don't want to be the bottleneck. You want to be part of the team. You want to be effective. And so I think all these things, really rattle around people's heads, not only within the first few days, but, within many, many months and certainly as they hopefully progress within your organization, that they're thinking about the next job and how can I get there and what do I need to know and how can I be more effective? And I think it's a highly motivated younger generations who are used to learning. And you look at the tools that they use, whether it's things like YouTube Shorts or other tools that are out there to learn with micromodule concepts. There's just a lot of knowledge out there that they can tap into. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a lot of maturity around the knowledge, but there's a lot of knowledge out there and they expect it. They don't expect knowledge to be kind of put into a safe and set aside from everybody. They expect it to be democratized. They expect it to be accessible. And I think the other part, as far as careers progress, people are really getting hammered right now, and have been for a number of years, around things like, technology taking their jobs. I mean, that goes back to the 70s and 80s with the robots coming for automotive jobs, for example, right? And really, what happened, of course, is people moved upstream and were able to do more and more complicated jobs, but they also needed to learn more. But with all that, there's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And I think in today's age, we're thinking about things like artificial intelligence, and it's almost kind of the same story being played out. And so people are being told that you have got to skill, reskill, new skill, whatever the words you want to use, in order to stay relevant, in order to expand your career and have opportunity. And so that really makes a learning and development program so critical to be able to address some of that anxiety, some of those fears. And again, it's the idea of investment, and is this organization going to invest in me? And it can be a real differentiator for companies.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question is for Kevin. Can you share some specifics about the training you provide to your employees? Does everyone in your company receive training, and is it mandatory?
First of all, yes, it is mandatory. It is back to my original statement I used, customized standardization. We want people doing things the right way every time. And we do have a thorough training program right from first day all the way through follow-up training within that department, specific job application. But yeah, it is day one and is not going to stop. And I talked about refreshing training and revising it as conditions change, new equipment gets brought on. We make sure that becomes part of the training modules within that department. And everybody's going to go through it. Whether they're a 25-year veteran or a kid right out of high school, they're going to get training.
Excellent. Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. So, Kevin, you used exit survey data to make your case for training. What other data points might be critical to start tracking if we want to present the financial case for training at our company?
I think we're in the manufacturing space, and specifically food manufacturing. So a lot of folks who are listening to this, they're not going to know what I'm talking about. A couple of metrics you want to track, and you start tracking at day one before you do training, and then track it as you go. Track unscheduled downtime. If you're in manufacturing, downtime is money, and it can sometimes be big money. So track that. You want to see unscheduled downtime go down, and uptime is the reverse of that. Are we getting more machine hours producing more saleable goods? So tracking uptime and unscheduled downtime, and you can track it by department, by machine, by operator. There's a lot of ways to track it, but I would strongly recommend you do that kind of tracking because it's easy to quantify those type of results. If you're going from 95% uptime to 97, that 3%, 2% gain that you have, it's easy to calculate how many extra cases, pounds, whatever you produced. Well, put the profit on that and boom, you got to win.
Well said. All right. And with that, that brings us to the end of our webinar. So thanks to our two experts for the great discussion today. You taught us a lot about the value of training, and we appreciate everyone tuning in. If you want to learn how WorkForge can help you create or improve your training program, get in touch with them using the links in the resource section. Finally, remember that today's webinar will be available on demand, and you'll soon receive an email with a link so you can rewatch or share with your colleagues. Have a great day.